guys, in this tutorial I'm going to show you some basic introductions to Adobe Photoshop. Now, the first thing we're going to cover is how to create a new document. Now when you open Photoshop it may look similar to this, it depends on the version you're using. So what you would do is if you have the option there, you would click create new, otherwise you would go to file and new or control and N as a keyboard shortcut. Now here you have the option to create a document. Now you can create one in pixels, in inches, centimeters and millimeters. Now there are a couple of other options, but these are the four you'll fundamentally use. Size wise, you can set it to automatically do landscape or portrait, otherwise put in the dimensions, and you may have an option to choose some presets. On my screen they're automatically here, so you've got photo, you've got print, ones for web, etc, etc. The other option you'll get here is resolution. Now generally the higher the resolution, the more clarity and the more detail you'll get in your image. However, with a higher resolution comes a higher image size, so you need to be careful when you're choosing to make sure it's appropriate for whatever you'll be using it for. Color mode. Now there are two color modes, RGB, which is red, green and blue. Now this is the choice you would use if you are using something for the web. It's something that's going to remain digital and isn't going to be printed. If you're going to print it, then you would choose CMYK. Now that stands for cyan, magenta, yellow and key. Now key is typically black, but it stems from the days where the key was the cheapest ink, which used to be like a blue or a dark blue, but in this case it's black. So if you're going to print something, you need to choose CMYK. Now for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to be using it for digital, so I'm going to choose RGB and I'm going to keep this as, 7 by 5 inches is fine. And you click on create. So this now is your canvas. And in here there are a selection of tools you can do. I'm going to introduce you to layers. Now layers are really important in Photoshop. This section here is your layers, and there are some additional options up here under layer. Now by default you'll have a white background and it is locked. This is the locked key here. Now as you add layers, you'll see you'll get a new layer. Now the layer that is on the top is the one that will be the most visible. You can kind of think of it as a stack of like transparent papers. So the one that's on top will show through the most, the one at the bottom will show through the least. Now as you add things in, so if I was to add some text here, I will say hello. Now currently that is on top, you can see it fine. Now if I was to add a new layer, you can click on down here, and if I was to add some more text which said bye. Now if I was to move this text so that it was on top, you'll see now that it obscures the one below it. So this is something to bear in mind when you're using Photoshop. Okay, so other options to think of here is the opacity and the fill. Now if you're not using layer styles, which is something we'll look at later, you can just use opacity, that's fine. Now as you can see, it changes how visible my layer is, like that. So 100% is fully visible and 0 is invisible. Now another thing I can do here is this eye here, you see here, if I click that off, that will turn the layer off. It doesn't delete it, it just makes it invisible. I can lock a layer, so if I click on this layer and click on this little padlock here, that will lock the layer. Now once it's locked, you can't make any changes to it. This is sometimes useful if you're doing some intricate changes and you've got lots of layers, so that you can make sure you don't accidentally make the change to the wrong layer. At the bottom here you can delete a layer. If I click my layer here and click on the trash can, you'll see delete the layer, yes, and now that's gone. There are some other options along the bottom here which we'll cover in a bit more detail in some of the other tutorials, but for now this is how you just add some basic layers in. So to save your image you would go to file and save, alternatively you can use Ctrl+S. Now you can save it as a Photoshop file here. Now this isn't an image file, however this will save all your layers and anything you're working on, so you can change it in the future, which I do recommend doing if you're working on quite a big project. So if I click on save here, so that is now saved as hello.psd, which is a Photoshop document. Now, if you want to save an image to use elsewhere, you will need to go to File, Export, and Export As. Now in here, you'll get a little preview window of your document, and you'll get some settings here. So by default, it goes to a PNG document, which is really useful if you want some transparency, so the background to be transparent, for example. You've got JPEGs, which are great for typical like photographs, etc. GIFs, which are very useful on the web, and also SVG. Now SVG is a vector file, and that's really useful if you want to blow an image up very, very big to be used in the future. Okay, but for sake of this, I'm just going to stick with a PNG, and I'm going to click on Export, and it works. Okay, and you can see now it's got hello.png. So now I have the Photoshop file here, which I can edit in the future, and I've got the image, which is what I can use then to post on social media or put into documents, etc, etc. So hopefully this has given you a little introduction to the basics of Photoshop, and you can go ahead and use this with some other tutorials that we'll cover a bit later. Thanks for listening. Bye.